He found a photo from their fifth date, 7 years ago. His wife laughing at something off camera. In the background at the bar, a man, sitting alone, not drinking, not talking, just looking directly into the lens with a flat, patient expression. He has looked at that photo hundreds of times. It was his profile picture for a while. He never noticed the man before. Every Tuesday at 9 p.m, his wife puts on her coat, grabs her keys, walks out the door, face completely blank. She comes back 46 minutes later, no memory of leaving. Google Maps shows a blank gap where those 45 minutes should be, like she was turned off. He followed her once. She drove 40 minutes out of town, into a dead strip mall parking lot. 9 strangers standing in a circle, nobody moving, nobody speaking. After 1 hour, they all turned and left at the exact same second. The man in the tan jacket who stepped forward into the center of the circle was the same man from the photo. He was at their 5th date, 7 years ago, before any of this started. Tonight, there is a new event on his calendar. The event is called Last. He has 26 minutes. His coat is already on the back of the chair. His keys are already on the dresser. He doesn't remember putting them there. What is up, guys? Welcome back. Tonight we have 5 stories from r/no sleep. So get comfortable. This is going to be a long one. Enjoy the video. And while you're watching, I'll be out here surviving in Minecraft. Story 1. I am a voyeur who spies on my neighbours. And the man I watched committing murder looked right back at me. I know exactly what I am. I am a voyeur. It is a bad habit, a deep character flaw, and I have never tried to justify it to anyone, not even to myself. I live on the 5th floor of a massive apartment complex. The building directly across the courtyard is an exact architectural mirror of my own. At night, it turns into a grid of glowing yellow squares, each one framing a different, completely oblivious life. My living room stays entirely dark. I sit in a worn armchair pulled close to the glass, resting my elbows on the windowsill to steady my hands. The binoculars I use are heavy, with large lenses that strip away the distance. I spend hours watching people eat dinner, watching couples argue in muted silence, watching the private routines of strangers. A few nights ago, the weather was exceptionally poor. A heavy rain washed out the city, keeping everyone indoors. I raised the binoculars and directed my attention to the 3rd floor of the opposite building. The window belonged to a woman who lived alone. I had observed her routine before. She usually read on her sofa until late, drank a glass of water and turned off the main light, leaving only a small bedside lamp glowing. I watched her walk into the bedroom. She pulled the covers back and settled in, reaching over to click off the lamp. The room plunged into shadow. I kept the lenses focused on her window, waiting for my eyes to adjust. A vertical slice of darkness in the far corner of her room began to move. He detached from the angle of the wall. He was tall and moved across the bedroom floor toward the sleeping woman. I held my breath, pressing the binoculars hard against my brow. The man leaned over the bed. His arms reached down. The woman thrashed violently, her back arched off the mattress. Her hands flew up, clawing desperately at the space above her throat. The struggle was brutal, and completely silent behind the heavy pane of glass separating our buildings. The man remained perfectly rigid, pressing his weight down, absorbing her desperate strikes without shifting his stance. The woman's movements grew sluggish. Her hands dropped away, falling limply onto the bed sheets. Her body settled back into the mattress, completely still. The man remained leaning over her for a long minute. Then, he stood up straight and turned his head slowly toward the window. Across a gulf of empty air and a driving rain, the killer looked directly into my lenses. A cold dread slammed into my chest. The distance between us was vast, yet I felt the weight of that stare as if he were standing in my own living room. The man took a slow step backward, positioning himself directly behind a thin floor lamp standing near the window. The lamp was a simple metal pole, perhaps 2 inches wide, The killer stepped behind the 2-inch pole and completely vanished. I blinked. I pulled the binoculars away from my face, rubbing my eyes. I looked back through the lenses. The bedroom was empty. The floor lamp stood in the corner, undisturbed. A man easily exceeding 7 feet in height had stepped behind a metal rod, no wider than a broomstick, and ceased to exist. Panic finally broke through. I scrambled across the dark living room and dialed 911, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I gave the address of the opposite building, the apartment number, told them a woman had just been murdered, then hung up. I ran to my front door. I engaged the deadbolt. I slid the chain into place. I stood in the center of my locked apartment, gasping for air. Then I noticed the cold. The ambient temperature in the apartment was dropping. A profound icy chill was seeping out from the corners of the room. The air conditioning was off. Yet the cold was biting enough to raise the hair on my arms. I scanned the dark living room. Everything looked the same. The sofa, the television, the tall wooden coat rack near the door. I stared at the coat rack. Something about the room felt wrong. My depth perception shifted, producing a faint, nauseating vertigo. I focused on the coat rack again. The wooden pole looked unusually thick, blurring slightly at the edges, as if my vision was smudging the surrounding space to compensate for something. And then I remembered something from a basic biology class. The human eye has a structural flaw. Where the optic nerve passes through the retina, there are absolutely no light-detecting cells. It creates a literal blind spot, a dead zone in the visual field of every single human being. We never notice it. The brain is a master of filling in the gap, taking colors and patterns from the surrounding area and seamlessly painting over the blank space. Furthermore, both eyes work together, overlapping their fields of vision to cover each other's blind spots. But here is the thing. If an organism understood human anatomy well enough, and if it was impossibly razor thin, it would not need to hide behind a wall. It would only need to hide behind a narrow object, actively aligning itself within the optic disc, relying on the brain's own rendering software to erase it from existence. The blind spot only hides an object successfully when both eyes are open, working together to stitch the image closed. I raised my left hand. My fingers were trembling. I pressed my palm tightly over my left eye. The brain's compensatory mechanism instantly failed. The distortion around the wooden coat rack snapped into horrifying clarity. Standing perfectly aligned behind the narrow wooden pole, less than 10 feet away from me, was the man. His limbs were tucked incredibly close to his torso, compressing his physical width to an unnatural degree. He was contorted in a rigid vertical line, hiding entirely within the narrow sliver of blocked light cast by the coat rack. His head was tilted slightly, downward, long, spindly fingers resting gently against the wood. He was staring directly at me. A scream caught in the back of my throat. I did not drop my hand from my eye. The moment I allowed my binocular vision to resume, the brain would edit the killer out again, allowing him to move unseen. The man realized his camouflage had been breached. He twitched, a jerky spasm, attempting to adjust his angle. He leaned slightly, his impossibly long joints popping loudly in the quiet apartment. I kept my eye covered, tracking his movement, locking my focus onto him. He could not hide from a single fixed point of view. I took a slow step backward toward the hallway closet. The man let out a low, vibrating hiss. He unspooled his limbs, the angles of his elbows and knees extending outward as he prepared to abandon stealth for violence. I reached blindly behind me, throwing open the utility closet. My hand patted frantically against the shelves. I knocked over boxes, Desperately searching for my old hobby supplies, the man took a massive, sweeping step forward, clearing half the distance between us in a single stride. His elongated arms reaching out to grasp me. My fingers brushed against a metal cylinder. I gripped the can of spray paint, yanked it off the shelf, pulled the plastic cap off with my teeth, aimed the nozzle directly at the towering man advancing toward me, and pressed down hard. A thick stream of bright neon orange pigment erupted from the can. The heavy aerosol spray coated the man from his collarbone down to his knees. The wet paint hit the stretched skin with a sickening splat. The killer recoiled violently, letting out an ear-piercing yell that shattered the silence of the apartment. He thrashed blindly, throwing his long arms over his face, completely disoriented. The bright neon orange paint clung to his flesh, dripping down his ribcage. The man's form was now visible against the muted colours of my living room. I dropped my hand from my eye, my binocular vision engaged, but the brain could no longer process the cover-up. The sheer contrast of the orange pigment destroyed his ability to blend into the background. I threw the aerosol can at his chest and bolted. I tore my fingernails on the wood as I clawed at the deadbolt. I snapped the lock back, ripped the door open, and threw myself into the brightly lit hallway. 3 police officers burst onto my floor, weapons drawn. I collapsed against the wall, pointing frantically toward my open door, screaming that the killer was inside. They swept through my apartment. A few minutes later, the lead officer stepped back out into the hall. He told me my apartment was completely empty. The windows were locked from the inside, no sign of an intruder. The only disturbance was a smashed lamp, a knocked-over coat rack, and a massive puddle of bright orange spray paint soaking into the living room carpet. The other unit breached the apartment across the courtyard. They found the woman in her bedroom, brutally strangled, no signs of forced entry. The doors were dead-bolted, the windows sealed, no DNA, no fibres, no fingerprints, no trace of anyone ever entering or exiting the room. The detectives sat me down in a sterile interrogation room. They laid out the facts: a woman murdered in a locked room. Simultaneously, I call 911, barricade myself in my own locked apartment, and vandalize my own living room with spray paint. I possess intimate knowledge of the exact time and nature of the murder across the courtyard. Yet I claim a towering, invisible man committed the crime. They did not believe a single word I said. They could not officially charge me. There was no physical evidence linking me to the victim's apartment, and the building's security cameras proved I had not left my floor all night. They released me pending further investigation. I am writing this from a cheap motel on the edge of the city. I cannot return to my apartment. The police are watching my every move. I know they will never find the killer. The authorities are searching for a human being who uses doors and leaves footprints. They are not searching for something that folds itself into the blank spaces of human biology. So I need you to understand the mechanics of what is hunting in this city. If you are sitting at home late at night and the temperature suddenly drops, if you feel a heavy icy dread settling in your stomach and the room feels deeply wrong, if your depth perception shifts, and a coat rack, a floor lamp, or an open door frame looks unusually wide or slightly blurred at the edges, do not trust your vision. Do not assume the room is empty. Raise your hand. Tightly close one eye. You might be completely paralyzed by the horror of what is standing in your blind spot, quietly waiting for you to go to sleep. Alright, that one is going to stick with you. I can already tell. Close one eye, look around your room, and tell me that didn't just do something to you. Let's not waste any time though, because what comes next hits completely differently. This one isn't about a monster hiding in the shadows. It's about something far more unsettling. The moment you realize you might not exist at all. Story 4. I do specialized cleanup work for apartments where people have died. But I have never seen anything like this before. I am a self-employed specialist cleaner for apartments where people have died. Usually old people. Grandparents whose families want the place emptied and cleaned so it can be sold as quickly as possible. It never bothered me. At least, not until tonight. I had taken on too many jobs again, blinded by the extra money. So by the time I reached the last house, it was already dark. The place stood in the middle of nowhere. When I parked at the entrance, I had the uneasy feeling that this would not be a quick job. The moment I stepped inside, I realized the house had not been emptied yet. Everything the old man had owned was still there, exactly where he had left it. A sheet of paper rested on the desk near the entrance. Sorry, but there were complications with the transport service. Please just clean as much as you can. The place where he died is the living room. I frowned at the nerds. Why had they not simply called me? Maybe they were afraid I would refuse the job if I knew beforehand. But I was already here. As I moved through the house, a strange sadness slowly crept over me. Family pictures covered the walls, the old man smiling into the camera, the old man eating dinner with his family. The old man sitting in an armchair with thick glasses on, reading a book while a cat rested in his lap. He had looked happy, and now he was gone. The subtle stench of death hit me the moment I entered the living room. There was a dark stain on the floor, roughly the size of a human body. Someone had clearly tried to wipe the spot clean before I arrived. But bodily fluids had soaked deep into the floorboards. Removing them properly required special chemicals. I pulled on my mask and got to work. After roughly half an hour, I finally managed to get rid of the stain. I let myself rest for a moment, eyes wandering through the living room. A small dinner table for two in the middle, and there in the corner was the armchair from the photographs. To the right stood a bookshelf filled with old novels. On the left side of the chair stood a large, full-body mirror. I glanced at my reflection and saw a tired, miserable face staring back at me, silently asking why I always had to be so greedy. I shook the thought away, pushed myself to my feet, and went outside to grab my coffee. When I returned to the living room, I turned on the old television for some background noise. Only static greeted me. I switched it off, the moment I placed the remote back onto the table and turned away. The television flickered back to life behind me, filling the room once more with loud static. I cursed under my breath, turned it off again, and forced myself back to work. An hour later, I finished the bathroom. 2 hours after that, the kitchen. When I returned to the living room, I was quietly humming some half-forgotten melody to myself. A loud noise suddenly echoed through the room, making me jump. A book lay on the floor in front of the large bookshelf. It must have fallen out somehow. I slowly approached it. There was no title on the cover, no author's name, just black leather worn and cracked with age. I bent down, picked it up, and opened it. A strange symbol filled the first page, a triangle with smaller markings branching from each corner. Beneath it was a single sentence. Ecce donas, has offeretus canas, rementulum eve colum. I read the words aloud. Latin, maybe? The rest of the pages were blank. Meow. I looked up from the book and froze. The black cat from the photograph sat only a few feet away, staring directly at me. So that was how the book had fallen. I had started imagining things. I slid the strange book back into the shelf and turned toward the cat. Hey buddy, you scared the hell out of me. I slowly knelt down and held out my hand toward it. Let's be friends. Meow. The cat turned around calmly, leaped forward, and disappeared straight through the mirror. I froze. On the other side of the glass, I could still see it walking away from me. Slowly, I got to my feet and approached the mirror. The apartment on the other side looked exactly the same, except for the cat, now sitting with its back turned toward me, while lazily licking its paw. This could not be real. I reached out carefully, expecting my hand to hit cold glass. Instead, it passed straight through. My breath caught in my throat. Before I could stop myself, I took another step forward, then another. A second later, my entire body had crossed through the mirror. Something felt wrong immediately. Sounds drifted in from the kitchen. The clatter of plates, the soft scrape of metal against ceramic, and beneath it all, the unmistakable smell of freshly cooked food. The cat slowly turned its head toward me. My knees nearly gave out. Its eyes were gone. Two dark, rotting holes stared back at me from beneath matted black fur. Flesh around its mouth had decayed away, exposing yellow teeth and parts of its jaw. Patches of rotten skin hung loose around its neck. I instinctively stumbled backward toward the mirror. This time, my back hit solid glass. No matter how hard I pushed, it would not let me through. The noises from the kitchen stopped abruptly. Silence flooded the apartment. A second later, I heard footsteps approaching fast. An old man stepped out of the corridor, drying his hands on a kitchen towel draped over his shoulder. He smiled warmly at me, then looked down at the cat. "Ah, Fluff, you brought a friend with you." Then his eyes settled on me, and his smile widened just a little too much. "I hope he did not bother you too much." No, I managed to choke out. Good. The old man gestured toward the small dinner table. "Come, sit down. Have dinner with me." I swallowed hard. "I am sorry, but I really cannot stay. I still need to finish my work." "Nonsense," he replied cheerfully. "I have not had guests in such a long time. I cannot let you leave hungry." He nodded toward the mirror. "You have worked hard back there. At least let me repay you with dinner. I just finished cooking. You arrived at the perfect time." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the look in the old man's eyes told me that refusing him would be a terrible mistake. So I nodded slowly and forced myself toward the table. He disappeared back into the kitchen and returned moments later carrying 2 plates. Rice and stir-fried vegetables steamed gently beneath the dim light. He placed the plates on the table alongside forks and knives before sitting down across from me. "Oh, this feels wonderful," he sighed. He tilted his head sharply to the left. Crack. Then slowly to the right. Crack. The sound of bone grinding against bone echoed softly through the apartment. "I really did miss having company," he said with a smile. I told him I had accidentally stepped through the mirror and could not go back. He laughed softly and said, "These young people nowadays, honestly, you cannot go back because you left the key behind, dear." "The key?" I asked carefully. "I do not understand." "The book, dear. The key." I glanced down at my hands. They had started trembling slightly. "So I cannot leave?" I asked. "There has to be another book somewhere in this apartment too, right?" The old man sighed deeply. No, the book is one of a kind, dear." My stomach dropped completely. "But of course you can leave," he added suddenly with a smile. "Someone simply has to read the words aloud from the other side. Then the mirror opens again." "Now," he said pleasantly, picking up his fork, "let us eat." Then he froze, completely. His fork remained suspended in the air while his eyes stared blankly ahead, unmoving. 1 second passed, then another. Almost a full minute went by before he suddenly resumed moving again, as though nothing had happened. Just before taking the first bite, he paused once more. "Oh, forgive my terrible manners. My name is Roland. And yours, friend?" "Lars," I answered quietly. I had no intention of touching the food. "You are not eating, dear," he observed gently. "Is something not to your liking?" Before I could answer, panic suddenly flashed across his face. "Oh, forgive this foolish old man." He slapped his forehead and pushed himself up from the table so quickly the chair nearly tipped over. "You see, at my age, I must be careful with what I eat. My stomach is not what it used to be." Then his eyes locked onto mine. "But you—" A wide smile spread slowly across his face. "You are a young man. Young men need meat." I watched him in frozen silence as he hurried across the room, scooped the cat into his arms, and returned to the table. "Forgive me for being such a terrible host." The cat let out a sharp cry. Crack! The sound of its neck snapping echoed through the apartment. Roland placed the dead animal onto my plate. Dark, rotten blood poured slowly from the cat's mouth, running into the rice and soaking the vegetables. The smell hit me instantly, sweet decay so thick I nearly gagged. "There we go," Roland said happily. "Eat now, dear. It is getting cold." I forced myself not to vomit. I told him I forgot to wash my hands after the cleaning work, and asked if I could use the bathroom first. "Oh yes, make yourself at home." The moment I stepped inside, I locked the door behind me. I hurried to the window and pushed it open. My breath caught in my throat. There was nothing outside, just endless darkness stretching in every direction. I grabbed the bar of soap from the sink and threw it out into the void. I watched it fall, and fall, and fall, far longer than it should have before the darkness swallowed it completely. There was no ground. A loud knock against the door made me flinch violently. "Everything all right, dear?" Roland's voice called from the other side. "Dinner is getting cold and you really should eat." I answered that I was fine and would like to stay a little longer. "Oh, but I cannot allow that." The warmth vanished completely from Roland's voice. "Surely you know that it is rude to leave the dinner table." Then came the last sentence, and the voice speaking it could not possibly have belonged to a human being. "So come out." The doorknob slowly began to turn. Metal squealed, then the wall beside the lock started to crumble with a dry cracking sound until the entire lock tore free from the frame. The door swung open. Roland stood there calmly, staring at the debris scattered across the floor. "Oh dear, what a mess. And after you cleaned everything so nicely too." "My apologies." Then he smiled again. "Now, please return to the table. I did not dare argue." I sat back down at the table, staring once more at the dead cat lying on my plate while Roland calmly returned to his seat across from me. "Eat." The patience had vanished from his voice. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I am not hungry." Roland looked at me silently for a moment. "You know," he said softly, "when I was a boy and refused to eat what my mother placed in front of me, she would take my father's leather belt and teach me how I was supposed to behave." He paused. "Maybe we should begin with teaching you not to leave the dinner table. It seems you never learned that lesson either." His smile widened. "It will be an easy one, dear. After all, you cannot run away from the table if you are no longer able to stand. Don't you think?" Panic hit me so violently that my body went numb for a second before adrenaline flooded through my veins. Without thinking, I grabbed the knife from the table and drove it straight into his left eye. The blade sank in with a wet crunch and remained lodged there. Roland did not even flinch. I stared at him in horror, unable to breathe. "Oh dear," he sighed. Calmly, he wrapped his fingers around the knife handle and pulled it free, together with the eyeball still attached. And here I was, trying so hard not to eat meat. He opened his mouth and bit the eye off the blade. Crunch. The sound was wrong. I nearly vomited as he chewed slowly. Then instinct finally took over. I stumbled backward from the table and sprinted toward the mirror, desperately shouting the words from the book. Nothing happened. The mirror remained solid. Now, Roland's voice growled behind me, no longer human in the slightest. "Let us begin the lesson." I spun around just in time to throw myself aside. The thing that had once been Roland slammed into the wall where I had been standing only a second earlier. He barely resembled a man anymore. His flesh had turned yellow and purple with decay. One arm hung so unnaturally long that its fingertips scraped across the floor, while the other stretched across the bookshelf like the limb of some enormous insect. I grabbed a chair and smashed it against him with all my strength. The chair broke in pieces. Roland barely reacted. I ran. I rushed into the kitchen while heavy footsteps followed behind me at an almost casual pace. He was not even hurrying. There was nowhere to hide. I bolted into the bedroom and flattened myself behind the door. A second later, Roland charged into the room so fast the floor shook beneath him. He tripped and crashed onto the mattress with a snarl. "Ah," he groaned in that distorted, corpse-like voice. Young people these days. No respect for their elders. I sprinted back into the living room. The mirror still refused to open. Then my eyes landed on the cleaning chemicals scattered across the floor. As Roland emerged from the hallway, I snatched up the bottle and hurled the contents directly into his face. The creature let out a scream. Not pained, angry. Clawing wildly at its remaining eye. "There is no escape," it snarled. "I can still hear you." Roland lunged toward me again. This time his claws caught my shoulder, tearing through flesh in long, burning lines before I managed to roll away. The pain nearly made me black out. Still, I forced myself toward the entrance door. Behind me, I could hear him charging after me. I grabbed the doorknob at the very last second and threw the door open before pressing myself flat against the wall beside it. Roland tried to stop, but his massive body carried him forward too fast. Just as he reached the doorway, I slammed both hands against his back with every ounce of strength I had left. The creature stumbled out into the darkness beyond the entrance. A furious roar echoed through the void as it fell, and fell, and fell. Its screams grew quieter and quieter until the darkness swallowed them completely. Then there was silence. I collapsed against the wall, sobbing for breath while tears streamed down my face. I do not know how much time has passed since then. I tried everything to return home. Nothing worked. Eventually, I realized that certain things I do on this side somehow appear on the other one as well. That is how I managed to leave this message behind. And if you are reading this now, then somehow it